Loretta Breuning is the founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, and she's the author of two books, Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. As the professor of management at California State University and as a parent, she lost her faith in the prevailing views of human motivation. Her search for answers led to studies of the brain chemistry we share with earlier mammals. Suddenly, everything made sense, and she began creating resources to help people manage their inner mammal. Her work has been translated into 8 languages and is cited in major media. Her latest book is Tame Your Anxiety, Rewiring Your Brain for Happiness. We get to be the beneficiaries of all her years of research and experience today. So welcome, Loretta.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Well, I have some slides with lots of cool animal pictures, but first I'll give you more of a general sense of how I got into this. I was a college professor for 25 years teaching management, and all my life I followed psychology. But because I was not in any one field of psychology for a living, I got to sample all of them, and as they changed over time, so I got to connect the dots and draw my own insights. And so what I'm saying is not what's being said by academic psychology. And it's not actually new research. It comes from the 80s, but it doesn't fit the politically correct view, which is now trying to romanticize the state of nature. But in fact, people who have spent time around animals know that they could be quite harsh with each other. And the animal part of our brain is what controls our emotions. So we have the big pink fluffy part of our brain that you see in pictures, but underneath that we have the other structures that you've heard about, like the amygdala and the hippocampus. And it's the same in animals, and it controls the chemicals that make you feel good, like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. And it also controls the chemicals that make you feel bad, cortisol. And so we have our big human brain that talks to us in words. So we often think it's giving us the whole story because our animal brain can't talk to us in words. But the animal brain controls the chemicals. So if you want to feel good, you have to make peace with your animal brain. We have 2 brains because we need both. We need them to work together instead of having this idea that one of them is the bad guy and you got to push it down. So that's the idea, is how your 2 brains can understand each other. And I'm going to apply that specifically now to the quarantine situation, since who would have thunk it that, that we're still there. I have a presentation that I adapted for that. So happy at home. This is what everyone wants to be. And these are the happy chemicals. And we'll go into more detail about 2 of them, and we'll have breakout sessions about 2 of them. And the other 2 are explained in all of my books. I have a lot of books, and we'll also carve out some time for the unhappy chemical, since I'm always asked to talk about stress and anxiety at this time. So some of the new challenges we face now: fear. So we need new ways to reduce cortisol. The self-discipline for people who are working at home, and that involves new ways to stimulate discipline. Many of you are not working at home, and so the other aspect of dopamine that we could talk about is how to have a sense of excitement about what you're doing when your days can be quite repetitive. And finally, loneliness is involved with the chemical oxytocin, so we'll think about new ways to stimulate oxytocin. So the purpose of all of this is to understand what stimulates these chemicals in animals, because that helps us understand ourselves. What stimulates them in the animal world is not necessarily the romantic, like happy talk view of what people tell you life should be like. This is just the research of what stimulates them in animals. And when you hear it, you'll say, wow, that really is the way people think. So a gazelle lives with threat all the time. How does it stay calm? A gazelle cannot say, I'm going to stay home until they make the world perfectly safe, right? So a gazelle has to go out into the world and be around threat. So how does it manage to stay calm? And the simple answer is it focuses on the path in front of it and it trusts its own skills. And soon it's back to rewards. So it would rather be eating. It's always trying to fill its belly. When it smells a predator, it runs and it trusts its own ability to escape the predator. And then it gets back to filling its belly. Now, you may say, yes, but some gazelles get eaten. And that's the big human brain in you that can project into the future and can generalize. So from the gazelle's perspective, I escaped before, so I'm going to escape now. So you may be focusing on everything that can go wrong, but you have also conquered many threats in your past, and it's your choice to focus on your skills at conquering threats or your failure to potentially conquer a threat. So you are always choosing which one you focus on. And if you turn on the news, you're always going to focus on the negative. If you hang around with people who complain, you're going to focus on the negative, but you always have a choice, and you can always remember the gazelle who has confidence in its own skills, okay? So its own skills, for example, pride in your immune system. My immune system is strong, and also, right now, the threat is being exaggerated. Like if you look at graphs, the threat is so low. I mean, it's so low that all the hysteria is really hard to explain because the actual statistical threat is extremely low. So you could focus on what you find rewarding instead of on potential threat. So our brain is designed to scan for threats and rewards. So that's how our ancestors survived. They're looking constantly for threats, but when they see something good, it's like, I need that, I want that. And if you can imagine that our ancestors were always hungry and they didn't have supermarkets and refrigerators. So they had to constantly look for food to survive. And we have inherited a brain that's designed to constantly look for rewards. It's designed to constantly look for food, which is why you often find yourself at the refrigerator. But because we have a full belly in the modern world, we look for other rewards that give us that same sense of, this is what I need. This is going to help me meet my needs. So that's the good feeling of dopamine. We'll be talking about that. Now, when you see something bad for your survival, your brain alarms you with cortisol, the threat chemical. Most of you have probably heard about cortisol. It's also called the stress chemical, and many people are into like measuring their cortisol and worrying about their cortisol. But from my perspective, you're better just accepting it and to know that your body eliminates it in an hour. So when something gets you going, then just say, this is a chemical that's triggered by an old pathway. I'm going to eliminate it in an hour. And until then, maybe it's better to do something fun, because if you do something hard, you're just going to trigger more cortisol. So when you see something good for your survival, your brain rewards you with happy chemicals, but threats get priority because in the state of nature, threats could kill you immediately. So we were always first looking for threats, and the big human brain can worry about threats that are not there. And this is how we can drive ourselves crazy if we let ourselves think about threats rather than focusing on rewards. So give yourself permission to focus on rewards and notice when you're focusing on threats and say, I have a choice. I'm going to focus on rewards, and don't feel guilty. Like often you feel guilty like everybody else is focused on threats and you feel like you have to join them in their worrying. But And they may say, who are you to be happy while everyone else is suffering? And that's their choice, but you have a choice too. So I made my choice. So our brain evolved to promote survival, not to make you happy. This is something that's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that our brain evolved to promote survival and not to make you happy, because you always hear so much romanticized happy talk that gives you the impression that I should just be happy all the time and everybody else is happy all the time. But that's not the job our brain is designed to do. In the animal world, like, animals get those happy chemicals when they take an action that helps them meet their survival needs. And then the happy chemical falls and they have to do more to get more. So this is why people often have that treadmill feeling. You always have to do more to get more. And this is just natural. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with society. This is how our brain is designed to work. So I found it so helpful when I learned this, because then I stopped thinking something was wrong with me, or am I in the wrong place? Or, you know, it's like, this is what life is. And we have, again, I say over and over, we have a choice. So moving on to the individual chemicals. So cortisol is designed to tell your brain to gather evidence about a threat. So for example, if you're a gazelle and you smell a predator, like, where is the predator? So you're gathering evidence. So a human example would be, let's say you're home alone and you hear a noise. Like, what is that noise? So that's gathering evidence, is what the big human part of your brain does to help out the chemical animal part of your brain. So they're always working together. So once cortisol says, look for threat signals, then what happens? You might find yourself looking for threats and looking and looking. The simple example would be if you get a voicemail from your doctor and your doctor says, please call me back, then of course you're going to think of terrible things endlessly. So learn to notice when your brain is looking for bad and say, that's my cortisol doing that. It's not the reality of the world. It's my own cortisol is triggering the circuits built from my past cortisol. We don't have a lot of time in this presentation to do the past circuits, but all of our chemicals are controlled by past experience connected neurons that tell you what is good for you today and what is bad for you today. So cortisol creates a full body sense of alarm that lasts for about an hour. This full body sense of alarm means that's why, you know, when you have stress or anxiety, that it feels so real and it's hard to relax, because in the animal world, that's the energy you need to run. And because in the modern world, we are not using that energy to run, but it reminds you that it's a good thing to take a walk or to do a physical activity when you feel threatened, but also to keep your mind busy so you don't go constantly to negative thoughts. We already did this. So you can learn to focus on rewards instead. Your reward chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. And today we will only have time for 2 of them, so I'm going into the 2 that are most relevant to a lockdown. So we stimulate these chemicals with neural pathways built from your unique individual past experience. So your past cortisol wired you to avoid similar threats in the future. So I'm gonna, it's really good if you can learn to think of examples of this. So if you have something that bothers you a lot, like a particular example would be, think of somebody who gets on your nerves. And why do they get on your nerves? It's because you're thinking X, Y, and Z. So that's a thought loop. And when you get upset about it, that's a real physical pathway in your brain. And you're thinking about that because that pathway is so well developed. Why is it well developed? Because of something that hurt you in your youth. So if you think of what happened in your youth, that's sort of similar to the pattern of things that bother you today. And you will find it. You'll always find it. And you'll find more than one. And you'll find it in other people, which is often more fun than looking for it in yourself. So you have to be fair and, not just look for it in others, but also find it in yourself. So again, look for the similarity between what hurt me when I was young and what really makes me mad and get me going today, because cortisol is like when you touch a hot stove, it builds a pathway and connects neurons that says, I'm not going to do that again. So what does that mean? I'm not going to do that again. It's helpful. It tells your brain, this is how to avoid getting hurt. So that's the job of cortisol. It's trying to help you avoid getting hurt. And that's what we are always doing with our cortisol, and often overdoing it. So that's what's so good to know, is we have that power to stop overdoing it. So Diane, you could give me a time check. I think I said most of this, so I'm going to move forward a little.
You have about 4 minutes till the breakout room, if you like.
Okay, good, thank you. So in quarantine, your past experience is not so reliable as it was, because all of your neural pathways that guide you are maybe not appropriate now because your life is different. So that's why we may look for new ways to feel good and avoid feeling bad. So what would be some new paths to the good feeling of dopamine? So dopamine is the expectation of a reward. It's like, I'm about to get something that I need. So for our ancestors, they needed food, but today we have different definitions. So when you were working, maybe you thought you needed a promotion. When you're retired, often it's a little harder to figure out. And so the simple answer is we need to set goals for ourselves, because goals are what trigger dopamine. It's seeing yourself get closer to the goal, just like this monkey when it's climbing toward the fruit. As it sees that it's getting closer, more and more dopamine is stimulated. And that's the good feeling that we're always looking for. Now, unfortunately, the good feeling doesn't last. So dopamine feels good because it releases energy. It's like, I use a funny example of cleaning out a closet. Let's say you have a closet that's a total mess and you never feel like doing it and it upsets you. But one day you start doing it and you actually feel good when you start doing it, even though it's so hard to get started. So that's something you can do in quarantine. And because it feels lousy, what I suggest to people is don't take the whole project at once. Take 1 square foot of it. And if you divide your closet in 7 parts and say, I will do 1/7 of it every day for a week. By the end of the week, your closet will be all cleaned out and you'll be excited all week, because dopamine is released when you step toward a reward. So the good feeling of dopamine motivates action to meet needs. And I'm just going to show you this monkey to show you that our action often fails. So we often fail, we often get frustrated. And this monkey is failing. They try to crack open nuts, and they desperately need those nuts because it's their only source of protein. And yet they fail and fail. So now another monkey is bigger and stronger and is kicking him out of the spot, stealing his tools, and this monkey is going to fail also. So monkeys fail a lot in their efforts to meet their needs, but they survive because they keep trying. And why do they keep trying? Because dopamine makes it feel good, okay? So dopamine makes you feel good when you take action to meet your needs. And that's the job our brain is designed for. Each step closer stimulates more dopamine. And your brain is really trying to predict a reward, but now life is unpredictable. So you can't do the predictable things that used to make you feel good. So you have to come up with some new ideas. So find a goal that you can step toward, something you control. Don't say, well, I can't do this because so-and-so didn't get back to me, but find something you can control, and small steps are enough as long as you keep taking them. So take small steps. If you've ever seen mountain goats climbing a hill that's almost vertical, it's unbelievable. Small steps work, and that's what stimulates your dopamine. Plan many goals, because sometimes one goal is blocked. And if you have many different goals, then as soon as one goal is blocked, you can move to the another. So if you have a short run goal, a long run goal, and a middle term goal, you will keep feeling good as you switch between them. So now we're going to have our breakout. And what would you do to stimulate your dopamine? What did you do before to stimulate your dopamine? And what would be some new ideas that you can stimulate it today?
Great. Okay, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and Loretta, back to you.
So now we're going to talk about oxytocin. And some people have heard of this. It's often called the love chemical. So that's why people have heard of it. Has its own fan club, also called the bonding hormone. But as you know, I'm not just supporting the romantic view of animals, but the facts. So oxytocin is the pleasure of social trust. And what that means is, if I groom you, will you groom me? That's sort of the animal aspect of reciprocal trust, reciprocity. And also, when an animal gets close enough to another animal to touch, they can kill each other in an instant. So they do not let other animals get close enough to touch them unless they already trust them. How do they know who to trust? Is whoever stimulated your oxytocin in your past triggered your, built oxytocin circuits that make you feel good today. So things that remind you of past trusting experiences make it easier for you to trust today. And I forgot to say that things that triggered your dopamine in your past make it easier for you to stimulate your dopamine today. So oxytocin is, when you see animals grooming each other, there is a reciprocity. Sometimes if I groom you, you groom me back. Sometimes you don't groom me back, but when a predator comes, that you protect me. So animals understand that reciprocity is complex, and humans do too. Now, oxytocin is the good feeling that tells you that it's safe to lower your guard. So when an animal's with the herd, it feels safe. And the more there's predators, the more they crowd into a group. But really what they want to do is find grass. And if they're all together, it's hard to eat. So really they want to spread out. But when they get too far away, their oxytocin falls. And if they smell a predator, then they panic and they go back to the group and their oxytocin rises. So we always have this complicated choice. I would rather go off on my own and explore greener pastures. But when I'm isolated, I feel threatened and I want to go back to the group where it's safe to lower my guard, because that stimulates my oxytocin. Okay? So we're always making that complex decision. There's no right and wrong. There's no simple answer. We're always navigating, because I want oxytocin, but I also want dopamine, but I also want to avoid cortisol. So all of these chemicals evolved to teach us, to guide us to meet our needs, meet our survival needs. So when you're separated from the herd, your oxytocin falls, which is why often people do things to be in a group, because the oxytocin feels good. But sometimes you have bad experiences in a group and you say, why do I put up with this? And now you know why is because you need the oxytocin. When you're home alone, you have to plan ways to stimulate the good feeling of social trust. And my strategy in the pandemic is to remember it's not just hugs that, you know, the media is talking all the time now about hug, hug, hug. But this touch is only one part of it. It's a very small part of it because, as you know, touching a person that you don't trust feels bad. So what we really want is trust, not touch. So how can I get trust? And the simple answer is that trust is built in small steps. And when you have the time, you can build trust in small steps. And the most powerful thing you can do in your life is to repair bad trust. So somebody that you have bad will with, somebody you have broken trust with, and you would like to have goodwill with them, you can make small steps toward them. And I'm not talking about going out and buying everybody a dinner, because if you give big steps, the person may not trust you and they may not reciprocate with a big step, and that will just reinforce your negativity. So the solution is to take small steps repeatedly, and don't expect a response immediately, but just take small steps toward people often, small steps of trust, that you communicate trust to someone a little bit, and then try someone else and try someone else. And what I say is 3 months later, somebody will get back to you. And 3 months and a day later, somebody else will get back to you. And every day you'll be reaping these rewards of the small acts of trust that you did in the past. Animals have plenty of conflict in their social groups, a whole lot of conflict. You've seen it maybe in nature videos. And sometimes they're mean to each other, but they make up, because isolation equals death in the state of nature. So you can learn from this to create opportunities to build trust, and your brain will reward you with oxytocin. Oh, something disappeared there somehow. You have, okay, well, that's time for our next breakout group. So let's talk about how you can stimulate oxytocin. So think about, how did you stimulate your oxytocin in the past? And what can you do now to stimulate that good feeling while you're in quarantine?
Let me just make sure that I understand, as we're going to go into our breakout rooms in a minute. The oxytocin, just review for me really quickly. The oxytocin would be triggered by reaching out, healing an old relationship, creating some kind of social environment for myself. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. But in small steps. So for example, instead of, like, let's say that you have some uncomfortable relationship with someone. I'm not saying that you should reach out and expect them to be your best friend, but let's say you write one line that says, hey, I thought of you today when I read about such and such, and it reminded me the good time that we had when we did such and such.
Yeah.
And then do that with someone else, and do that with someone else. So that's one example. So another example would be, I used to enjoy this certain social activity, and I can find a way to do it online, and I can invite, or maybe to do it in person, because you can do things with individuals today if you choose. And you invite one person, and if they say no, invite someone else, invite someone else. If people say no, it's fine. Think of that monkey that keeps trying to crack open that rock. And instead of feeling threatened when someone rejects you, to just keep trying.
Perfect. Great examples. Okay, so Rebecca, are we ready to go into breakout rooms again? We'll have 5 minutes again, so that's 1 minute plus per person. And we can share with each other ways that we personally can create some oxytocin in our brain and definitely feel better from that. So here we go.
Okay, so You have power over your brain chemicals, and you've had this power all along. You've been controlling your brain chemicals all along. You just didn't know it. You control it with your thoughts and basically choosing whether you're going to go into the pathways you already have or struggle to build new pathways, which is quite a challenge. And that's the subject of all of my books. So it's hard to find your power over your brain because we have two brains. And this is an amazing picture of the animal brain that's inside the big pink fluffy part that you see when you're just looking at an external picture of the brain. So that internal part is like really powerful. It's sort of like looking at a car under the hood. So one brain talks to you in words, and the other brain is inherited from earlier animals. And what you tell yourself in words is not always the whole story. And the simple example, like, is if you feel socially rejected, then maybe you tell yourself, I shouldn't feel that way, or they're a jerk. So whatever you tell yourself, it really helps to think about, oh, I'm a mammal and my oxytocin and cortisol are wired from past experience. So I'm inclined to replay a pattern from my past feelings about my herd. And it's just such a relief, I find. When you understand your animal brain, you can turn on your happy chemicals in new ways. Animals reach rewards in a world full of threat because they focus on the path in front of them. So we always have the pleasure of our next step. You can enjoy your next step and start those happy chemicals going right away, because as soon as you step toward an expected reward, you start to feel good, regardless of what everybody else is doing. You can build new neural pathways that expect rewards in new ways. So we're always predicting rewards, and many people are predicting that they're going to fail to get the nut, you know? And so when you predict that you're going to succeed, you feel better. If you repeat a new habit daily, you build a new trail through your jungle of neurons. And again, this is the subject of all of my books, is how to do that, to build new pathways to have positive expectations about the reward chemicals. You give the electricity in your brain a new place to flow. So it's a real physical thing. Your old pathway is a real physical thing that invites your electricity to flow, because it's like a paved highway, like you drive your car on the highways that already exist. So if you want to have new thoughts, you have to build new highways. You will start to expect to feel good, and you'll be glad you did it. So this is my introductory book, Habits of a Happy Brain: Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin. And it's very simple and fun to read. And I have a newer book called Tame Your Anxiety: Rewiring Your Brain for Happiness. So this is all about cortisol. Then I have a book called The Science of Positivity: Stop Negative Thought Patterns by Changing Your Brain Chemistry. And this is more from the herd perspective. So if everyone around you is negative, that you can still choose a positive path, that there's nothing superior about joining in the negativity. This is my website. Not a very good slide for the website. Ouch. So innermammalinstitute.org, innermammalinstitute.org. And I have a free 5-day happy chemical jumpstart and videos that make this all very simple, and podcasts. And this slideshow is on there too. And I'm happy to hear from you. And that's all.
Yay, let's all give Loretta a big hand. I really got a lot out of this.
Okie doke. Happy to hear your questions now.
I see that Gail has her hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself, Gail, and ask a question?
What is training certification?
I have a training program. It's not very extensive. It's $45, and you can become a certified inner mammal trainer. It's like a class where, I mean, it's individual study, and it's a series of quizzes based on my books.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
I have a question, which is that it happens so many times a day that I'll look at a picture or something and an old regret will come up, or something that just hooks me from the past. Is there any way to really permanently indent those things or make those things disappear? It's frustrating because it's so repetitive.
It is frustrating, and especially in quarantine, you know, when you see a picture of like, and it's like, oh, remember when? Yeah. So first, aging is difficult, and the loss of time, you know, and you see a baby picture of your children and you've lost their childhood. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. And the simple answer is nothing but focusing on your next step is what gets your happy chemicals going. But those things that pull at your heart help you understand your circuits. So if you say, I really used to love X, then my next step, what can I do related to something I used to love? So that's sort of a guide of something that might make you feel good. But because of our mortality and our aging, all through human history, people had faced this conundrum because animals are not aware of their own death, but people are. So this gives us a special challenge. And the simple answer, before the era of birth control, people had lots of kids, they had them young, they had grandchildren, and everybody was nearby. And when you taught your traditions to your grandchildren, that created a sense of legacy. So watching your grandchildren carry on your traditions gave you the feeling that you were surviving and that you would always survive because you saw yourself continuing in them. And we don't have that today. So we have to create something else that gives us the feeling that we will continue. And I use like a simple example. If you're a carpenter and you build a table, that table will continue. So we want to build anything that will last. And that's what gives some relief from that feeling of aging.
Oh, that's great. So does somebody else have a question or want to tell us what your favorite takeaway was from this today? I just can't wait to get that very simple book that, and we're going to have a raffle in a few minutes, everybody. So be thinking of a number between 1 and 50. In fact, you can go ahead and type that in your chat right now because we're going to be choosing that in a couple of minutes.
I can address a question in the chat if you want about elephants and apes seem to relate to death via grief. So yes and no. The media and academia are full of romanticized views of animals. And animals are not aware of their own death. Now, the famous story about the chimpanzee who died of grief, I have this in my new book coming out next year. What you should know is that chimpanzee who died of grief was the first chimpanzee in history that was sort of raised by humans, because Jane Goodall, in order to make contact with it, she gave the chimp and its mother bananas. And they liked the bananas, but this child did not learn to find its own food. Now, every monkey in history learned to find its own food. That's how they survived. But this ape did not learn because it was raised on bananas. Now, when Jane understood that, she stopped doing it. But once this ape's mother died, it didn't know how to find food, and it just collapsed. So that has been blown into an empathy thing because that fits the current narrative of the psychology industry, but it's really false. And the fact of that particular ape is it's hard to believe, but I have this on the public record on my website. When it was time for its mother to stop breastfeeding it, she was so weak that he bullied her and he forced her to keep breastfeeding him because he was stronger than her because of the bananas. And so he was bullying her.
Oh, wow.
It was not empathy.
All of these wonderful things we see on Facebook about these interspecies loving each other, grooming each other. I don't know, those make me feel really wonderful inside. What chemical is that when I see creatures taking care of each other?
So again, that's oxytocin when you see them grooming, but you're getting a romanticized vision of that, because a lot of them, they're grooming in 1 minute, then they bite each other, then they go back to grooming, then they bite each other. So that's why that's often used to give humans this idea that something is wrong with our society, because you're getting an artificially rosy colored view of the animal world.
I don't know. I don't want to give we bite each other too. And
Every once in a while. But it's more fun. You'd have to do it again.
Okay. Do we have any last minute questions here before we move into our raffle? Has everybody put a number in? And let's give Loretta a few minutes to wind up and say any last words that she wants to. I loved your presentation, Loretta. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, you asked about what would be a permanent way to change a thought loop. So the simple answer is repetition. So repetition builds pathways, and it's hard to do, and people often think it's unfun. So it's hard to get yourself to repeat a new behavior when the old behavior feels natural. So the way they train animals, as you know, is to give them a treat. And that's what trains them to do the repetition. And you can do that with yourself too. So break it into small steps, repeat, and give yourself a treat after. So if you only give yourself food treats, then you'll gain weight. So the alternative is to find other ways to treat yourself for the new behavior. But first you have to target, what is the new thought loop that I want to have? And then how will I treat myself when I repeat it?
Well, I love that. I'll have to think about that. Maybe I could just eat one M&M.
No way.
I can't gain too much
Or
weight.
the way I explain it is, if you're going to have dessert anyway, don't have dessert until you've done your daily challenging new step.
Rewiring. Wonderful. Well, I get to thank you. Let's all give a big hand to Loretta. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. You are just amazing. You're my new hero. I think you're fantastic.
Thanks so much.